Hi, and welcome to the conversation series from the Composer Wellbeing Collective. I'm Emily Richardson. I'm a composer agent and music supervisor and founding member of the Composer Wellbeing Collective, which is a new non-commercial initiative committed to raising awareness and increasing impartial support for the wellbeing of composers and music creators, with a focus on positive conversation around mental wellbeing. Check out our website, Instagram and Twitter pages for details on the next conversation, and please do get in touch. We would love to hear from you. Every voice helps to open up the conversation around composer wellbeing. Today we're discussing a topic that was briefly touched on by Roger in a previous conversation. I think it was the second in the series, which is safe spaces. And we're going to explore this in a sort of a safe space as like a sort of metaphor, but also as a physical safe space, and in a way how composers can take a step back from problems and issues, and how that helps them figure out a way to solve them, and to come to a place of sort of mental safety, as it were. We're going to be talking again to Roger Kneebone. Roger trained as a surgeon and then went on to become a GP, and is now a research fellow at Imperial College, studying performance science and interdisciplinary skills, researching the different fine skills and performance aspects of a variety of different roles, from tailors to polar explorers. We're also going to be speaking to composer and producer Miguel de Oliveira. Did I get that right? Who has written for lots of well-known TV shows, including Louis Theroux and First Dates. An interesting fact about Miguel is that he actually trained, he was a medical student and worked in hospitals for a few years, and has also had roles such as a scuba instructor and a cartoonist and an audio engineer. So I'm sure we can look at lots of parallels between all those different skills. And we're also talking to Nick Foster, who is a BAFTA award-winning composer and producer, and has written for lots of well-known productions such as Thunderbirds and Darren Brown. Welcome, everybody.
Hello.
We're talking for a long time now. Let's start off with Roger. This was actually your concept originally, and we've sort of stolen it for a conversation. You really interestingly spoke about how you noticed these parallels between lots of different people, and the way that they spoke about places of safety in their work. I wonder if you could maybe just revisit what you said to us in the previous conversation about the different ways that you found those different people found their places of safety in their work.
Yes, well, I mean, it wasn't my idea. I stole it from them, actually. So this came from a series of conversations I've been organising with people outside medicine and inside medicine to look at issues around performance, particularly. And this one was a year or so ago, and we were looking at risk and resilience and dealing with error. And it was a conversation lasting several hours with an interesting group of people. One of them was a surgeon. I've been trained as a surgeon, but this Chris is a consultant, upper gastrointestinal surgeon who does a lot of work with people with stomach cancer and gullet cancer. One of them was a polar explorer who, amongst other things, had been the deputy director of the British Antarctic Survey at one stage, and who then went on to be in charge of safety for the whole of BP. So that's, you know, everything, including oil tankers and offshore drilling rigs and all that kind of thing. Very interesting perspective on safety. The third one was Pietro, who is a classical guitarist, professor of classical guitar in Reykjavik, doing a PhD at the moment at the Royal College of Music. And I know him through the Centre for Performance Science, which I jointly lead with my colleague at the Royal College of Music, between the RCM and Imperial, where I work. And then the fourth one, and he does a lot of work with a lot of performing pieces of music that have been specially commissioned for him, often live and on the radio. So high stakes kind of stuff, very complex contemporary music. And then the fourth one, Phil Bayman, is a combat pilot, had recently retired so to speak. I mean, he's only in his 40s, I think, but gone on to the next stage in his career. But for decades, he had been not only flying supersonic aircraft in combat situations, tornadoes and hurricanes and things, but training other pilots, particularly people like the Red Arrows aerobatic display team and that sort of thing. So very interesting perspectives. And we were talking about what happens when things go wrong, and that initial moment when you think that something might be going wrong, but you're not quite sure what it is yet. And they all had examples of times when that had happened. And bear in mind that the ones I was talking to were ones who were extremely experienced and very successful. I think in the case of the pilots and the explorers, some of the ones who have bad mistakes either don't survive or don't carry on in that world. So the ones I was talking to was a particular group, but they had all reached the stage, they said, when they had worked out in advance how to go to a place of safety, as they put it, when they got that sense that things were going awry, even if they didn't, even perhaps especially when they didn't know exactly why that was happening. And they all told very different, but sort of similar in a way, stories about when that had happened. The polar explorer talked about when he was going across a glacier, and it was getting towards the end of the day. He was getting very tired. He didn't know quite exactly where to go, although he had a general idea. He was, and the weather was closing in, and he had to make a decision about when the time had come when he needed to stop pressing on in the hope of getting to his destination that night, but to dig in and make an ice shelter and conserve his remaining energy, because if he went beyond that point, he would use up so much that he wouldn't survive the night. The musician was interesting in that he was saying that when things started to go wrong, he would change his focus from what he was doing to becoming even more aware of the other people around him, getting back into tempo with the other musicians, getting to a place where he could sort of calm down and just reset before carrying on with what he was doing with his solo instrumental work. The surgeon said something rather similar. In a very difficult operation, he might just stop and then sort of reposition the organs, the patient's organs, in the way that they were at the beginning, so that he could then rethink what had happened when he got to the point where he was having problems. And the combat pilot I thought was particularly interesting. I think I mentioned this one last time, where he gave an example of coming down to land, and he'd done it thousands of times before, and he always went through the same checklist of the things you have to do just before you land. And he'd done all those things, but he got that sort of sense he couldn't quite put his finger on, that things weren't as they should be. And so instead of trying to work out why they weren't as they should be as he was coming down to land, he instinctively put on full power and climbed and got to a safe altitude where he could then go around in a circle and start to replay what had happened and work out what had gone, what wasn't quite right. And then he realized that in that case, in spite of going through all the steps that he should have done with his checklist, he hadn't actually done the action that led to putting down the undercarriage. He'd gone through that bit on the checklist that said pull lever to put down undercarriage, but he hadn't pulled the lever. So if he had landed, he would have crashed and died. And so we had this interesting conversation about the value of having worked out in advance something to do to get to a place where at least those things won't get worse. And it gives you a breathing space. And that's really where this idea of a place of safety came from. And thinking back on my own experience in various parts, it made sense to me too. And so maybe Miguel and Nick, we could see whether that resonates with you as well.
The last thing you said, Roger, which seemed to be about pre-planning and the importance of putting down your markers and deciding what your aims are and your objectives are before you start doing something, seems to me to be a really important thing in terms of writing music. And often, if you put your objectives down, you have a brief, you've had your conversation with the director or whoever, and you know what your sound world is, your sound palette is, and you have some picture to write to usually, and so you do have a clear marker. But there is that scenario where, maybe chimes with what you were saying, in fact, that you feel like you've done these things, you're progressing as it has worked 100 times before, And on the 101st time, it isn't landing. Something's not happening with the cue you're writing or the theme you're after. And it's just not landing. I'm speaking metaphorically, despite having gone through that checklist. And I suppose that for me, one of the interesting things is, what do you do then? Because I think seen that both ways. You see it sometimes where you're nearly through the wall, you just need to keep going for 3 minutes and something will click and suddenly all the pieces that weren't quite fitting together now fit together. Other times you could sit and look at it and play with it for another 2 hours and it won't work. What you need to do then is to regroup. And I suppose that's when you go, you find a safe space, you go to, you take a step back, you reassess, and then you go in again. Perhaps you'll redo some of what you've done, perhaps you'll start fresh. I don't know, Miguel, what do you think about that? Is that
on the issue of safe space and perspective? I see two different, almost polar opposite approaches from what I experienced in my previous career, which a serious situation that would need a rapid reassessment would probably involve me getting deeply religious for the first 5 seconds and then going on to a different set of directives than what happens now, because I have never encountered a situation that would need immediate resolution. For example, I've never conducted an orchestra that was very costly, where something might have gone wrong and I would need to fix something quickly on the spot. I've been in situations where things have, well, to use the proper word, gone wrong, or have gone really difficult, but I have time to almost go through that checklist without worrying too much. Do I need to land in the next 10 or 15 minutes? For instance, I treat every work that I get with the utmost respect. After all, they're paying me, and this is why I should never, I suppose, do work for free. But if, let's say, an email lands in your inbox with a list of 60 bullet points requests to change stuff the night before the dub, no one's going to die if you don't go through all of them. You may agonize through the whole night and find out that it's eating you inside, that you can't address everything, but you need to take a step back and see, look at the list of priorities and realize that it can be all done within reason. And one thing I had to learn was to remove myself from being too close to the situation. So
Miguel, sorry, I would really like to ask, because I'm really interested. I think, like, I've read studies before where it's sort of said that it doesn't matter, obviously, because we're talking about, the things that Roger is talking about are things where it's like life or death. And hopefully, I don't think that's ever happened in composition. If something goes wrong, no one's going to die. But I've read that, the mental reaction by people, it doesn't actually matter how serious the situation is, the stress levels are actually just the same. So I was wondering, in your personal experience, how have you personally sort of reacted? How have your stress levels or anxiety levels, how have they sort of reacted?
I agree. I thought I had sort of been vaccinated by having been through a few situations in my medical career and also a scuba dive instructor where things needed to be sorted straight away, actually, there would have been situations on scuba diving where my life was in danger because someone had lost, was no longer capable of reasoning. But I thought that would sort of put me on a safe position here. But no, I've gone down paths where I sadly catastrophize little. I think that's even a point that not many people are aware of, that sometimes your worst enemies, a situation may be only going slightly wrong and you make a much bigger horror film in your head. And again, I've tried to set up a few points, even writing down stuff that I think I can be useful for me as a manual, because if you have self-esteem problems, you may not even remember the ways you've dealt with things positively in the past or your victories, your brain deletes all that. So I think for me, it's important to almost have a list of good things that happened to you and ways that you've wriggled yourself out of tricky situations in the past, and maybe even put it out on the wall. And remember, if it's written, it happened. So use that.
That really chimes with me, Miguel, because you can have done it 150 times. It still feels like the first time you've done it. Yeah. It can be very difficult when you say, as you get an email with the bullet points, or you have a number of changes or something to go, okay, so that's fine. The automatic reaction for me is a kind of fight or flight thing, whereas actually the thing to do, which is difficult to do, is to read it, then take a minute away, then approach it, and don't sort of just charge in, panicking, flying, metaphorically throwing stuff at the wall, maybe literally too, and just thinking, well, this is awful and I'm never going to be able to fix this. And it's strange how the brain does just completely delete the number of times you've managed to fix these things quite easily.
I agree. I mean, we're all, I suppose, proud of what we do. I mean, after all, it's our name in there, but I think it's very important to accept a set level of quality, because we all know if we stop, if we finish a bit of work and then maybe give it a few days before we reassess it, we can make it better, and that's a great thing. But we have to learn to let go. I see it almost as, I don't know, going up on a hot air balloon. At some point there's an optimal altitude to enjoy stuff. If you get addicted to it, you'll freeze yourself to death. So it's important to know when to cut the umbilical cord. And this is good enough. I'm happy with it. I'm proud of it. Move on. So.
I think one of the interesting things that came out to me from talking to these other experts was that they had, in a sense, abstracted from individual experiences they'd had, where they had bad things that happened and they'd responded or whatever, but they'd sort of been able to pull out of that this idea of a safe space that they didn't yet have to go to, but they knew it was there if they did have to go to it. So they weren't just responding to that email with 60 things that they had to do by tomorrow morning, or that feeling that something was going wrong with their landing or whatever it was. They had kind of put together and they had gone through enough of those to be able to sort of squirrel away in their heads somewhere what they would need to do to get to a safe place, so that if a moment came when they did need to, then the actual getting there was automatic, and it just kind of happened. And then when they got there, then they postponed reading what was in the email or thinking how to deal with the weather or whatever it was, until they got to that temporizing space. And I think that might be a characteristic of quite a lot of experts, is that they have had the opportunity, but also it has occurred to them to put things in place. And sometimes people have told them that. I mean, when I was a trauma surgeon, my boss said something very early on, said something like, it's very easy to panic, but when things go really badly wrong and you get a fountain of blood hits you in the eye and that kind of thing, it's very tempting to act straight away. Don't. Put a swab on it, get your assistant to press as hard as they can, go away and have a cup of tea, come back, and 5 minutes later things will look completely different. And so that sometimes somebody tells you that, but very often somebody doesn't tell you that, and you kind of have to work it out for yourself. And I think that's what we're talking about in terms of a sort of psychological space, and perhaps in your worlds, Miguel and Nick, with those rather different pressures, but equally pressing pressures, I'm quite sure, then having ways of doing that might be helpful to other composers, perhaps to think collectively of whether there are ways that fit with your kind of working.
I would say one of the things that we do have as we gain as composers more experience is we have this sort of kit bag of tools of how to deal with things, and you can sort of recognize in a situation, if you take that moment to be calm, you can recognize a situation and say, I've had a comment like that before. That is a complete rewrite. No, that's just this, that, and you can sort of judge the level of work that's needed from you. And that's one thing I do on a list of comments, is I go through them and I sort of color code them. It's like, that's a big one, that's going to take some time. That's 10 minutes. That's, my assistant can look at that. Somebody else can look, and you can go through it like that. And if you can, I think the problem is not utilizing that stuff. It's being calm until you can get to use that stuff. Because if you're overwhelmed by the need to tweak, the need to change, then it can sort of it can stop you from using the stuff that's in your kit bag, I think.
I agree. I noticed that I've become happier since I've learned, well, a bit to separate everything in two groups: the things that I can control and the things that I can't. So the quality of my work I can control, the feedback I can't, the investing in a friendship I can control if it's reciprocated. Well, another thing I can control is pronouncing. Reciprocated is another thing. That applying for a pitch I can control, the outcome I can't. So it's worry about the stuff that I can put a lot of effort and love into, and learn to move on from the things that depend on others, depend on chance, depend on God knows what. So, and on either that 60-point bullet list or something else, there would always be a way of pushing it into one of these two categories.
I think there's something interesting about this need to kind of reframe things in the moment. I used to encounter this when I was a GP from time to time, when I'd be talking to somebody, you know, might have a 10-minute appointment or something, and quite a lot of people waiting and things. And then sort of towards the end of a 10-minute consultation, which might be about something apparently very straightforward, somebody might have a cough or something, it would emerge that there was something really serious going on, or there might be. And the whole landscape changed. And so I had to reconfigure what the broader situation, not just think differently about what might be the medical cause of that person's condition. I don't know, it might suddenly become clear. I might examine them and find that they had a hard knobbly liver or something, which made it seem likely that they had cancer or something like that. It could be all sorts of things. But then I had to be aware of the implications of that. I had to decide whether to extend the consultation and try and unpack some of those things then and there, or make an arrangement to do it at another time, thinking about all the other people that were waiting and the knock-on effects for the practice, for the organization as a whole, you know, all that sort of thing. And I think the other experts I've been talking to also have that sense of needing to reframe at a time when it's particularly easy to focus on you as an individual and your emotional state and your response just as you, but actually there are all these implications for the wider framework of the system that you're in. And I guess as composers with deadlines and orchestras and all those things that you must be dealing with, perhaps there are parallel issues there too.
One of the things that you just said that I really see, it's looking at the bigger picture. And one of the great things about what we do is we're part of a team. One of the difficult things about what we do is we're part of a team. So we whatever it is, whatever project it is, we all at one level or another, we really love the music we're doing, hopefully. We really love it, and we have an emotional attachment to it, and we have which isn't a straightforward thing. It's emotional, whatever it is, and that makes it slightly irrational, I think. And I think that means we're open to disappointment, rejection, feelings of being hard done by, not being, and rejection, which is difficult. But if we have to separate that at some level, and we have to look at what we've done as Miguel says, we do the best we can do. We do the best piece of music that we can. We try and talk to the scene as best we can. But if it's rejected, it's rejected. That's okay. And at that point, you have to let go and go, it's just a component. That's just one thing. I did it. It's not going any further. That's okay. I do think, and these are first world problems, and this is not the same as being a surgeon. This is not the same as the amount of things. But I think you might have suggested it's not the size of your mountain, it's the fact that it's your mountain, And I do think that is a challenge, and which I'd be interested what Miguel thinks. I'm not sure I've got better at this and it's now fixed. I think it's you still have a cue that you write and you think, oh, it's good, that one. I'm really, really proud of that. And then
well, funny enough, I'm very jealous of you both, you and Benji, on not only of you both as composers, but the fact that you work in teams. I've always worked alone. I suppose maybe that comes from me being an only child, but I still would crave that the opportunity to have someone to kind of share the stress and glory if ever came. But I agree that it may bring other problems if, like you say, being part of a team can be a blessing and a curse. But when you're used to dealing with stuff continuously on your own, I've been in situations where I realize sometimes a bit too late that my judgment was going to be clouded by me feeling completely powerless and frustrated and overwhelmed by the circumstances.
Yeah.
And one thing that has helped on very two tricky situations was to write down my demons. So in front of me, I'd put on sometimes a massive sheet of paper, anything from potential health problems or something that was going on, to people who owed me money, to people who were ghosting me, to things that weren't going well. And just be very honest and very raw, and put everything in front of you, and maybe revisit the list the next day. And with a cool head, it has happened before that I was able to cross something off the list and say, no, I need to move on and forget about these or other things you may see how you can tackle it. Sometimes you can see it can be something simple that is eating you inside. A couple of years ago, for instance, I had sold an expensive piece of kit from my studio through eBay. The guy who bought it broke it straight away, didn't want to pay for it, managed to get eBay on his side. So I lost the money on that thing. I lost the postage, I lost everything. And he was driving me nuts. And I even spoke with a couple of friends of mine who are policemen. And one of them said, well, let's go around his house and muscle it out of him. And 10 years ago, I would have thought, well, that'll be fun. But now I have to learn to move on. So being able to cross that off the list and say, no, karma will hopefully do the job for me, has helped tremendously. Because if I kept agonizing about it, it would have impacted on everything. And I like to be, it almost seems like you're being cruel to yourself by writing it down, but I found it helpful.
I really like that idea, Miguel. I think that that's like, it's almost like the concept of making something that's that's sort of psychological into a more physical thing, and actually being able to see things in front of you. You're taking it out, you're almost taking it out of your mind and putting it on a paper. And it's that, you know, that, I mean, there are some sort of psychological techniques that are quite popular where things that are worrying you sort of put them into like a mental box in your mind and then move on from them. That's almost kind of the
almost into voodoo and to lots of other things. It's physical. You rip it, you cross it. Yeah.
Exactly, and you're physically getting rid of it. And I think also, if you write things down on a piece of paper, you're completely right. Sometimes you'll write something down that's really bugging you, and as soon as you've written it down, you think, actually, this is such a tiny thing. It's irrelevant, and I can cross it off this list. Or, you know, if there's something that you can do about it, do it. And if there isn't, then just let it go. And I think, you know, I mean, I personally, I get quite stressed, and it can cause like quite, you know, it can affect my mental health quite badly when I think to myself, what is actually wrong at the moment? Like, there's nothing huge that's going wrong in my life, but what it is it's a lot of very small little annoyances that I know I have to deal with, or I need to move on from. And I haven't written them down before, but I sort of go through them in my mind, and I'm like, what is actually causing me stress right now? And I need to get back to an email that's going to be like I'm going to have to write a bit of an essay for it or whatever, and that's going to take a while. Just do it. And then it's done. And as I cross those little tiny stresses, all of a sudden I feel so much better, and it's such a relief.
Yeah. I think sorry. No, I'm just going to say there's something else interesting that came out of my conversations with these other people, particularly the pilot, which is about the effect on your thinking of physiology. And in his case, it was G-forces. So the pilots, you know, when you're going at supersonic speeds and you're going around a corner, it sucks the blood away from your brain and down to other parts of your body. I guess it's the same in diving. But that brings about very subtle changes in how you think that are quite difficult to pick up at the time, but they have a profound impact. And it's a bit like altitude, you know, all those things that you get in extreme environments. And I certainly got that when I was very tired, because at the time I was doing surgery, it was the days when you used to operate, you know, you used to work for, 48, 72 hours without a gap sometimes. And at the end of one of those, a sort of Monday morning after having been up all night on Friday and Saturday and most of Sunday night, I would start to behave oddly. I would start to drop things. I'd start to sort of giggle inappropriately. And it's a bit like when you're very hungry and you don't realize that what you actually need is a chocolate biscuit. You just get crabbity and irritated with people and irritating. And these things can have a profound effect on how you perceive what's going on around you, I think. And so there's something about developing the ability, Miguel, I think that's what you were talking about a bit, you know, to recognize when you're getting in that state, when you're pissed off by lots of little things that actually you could solve by no longer allowing them to do that, rather than having to fix them. And so, you know, making adjustments in yourself rather than in the things that are coming at you is something, again, that I think takes a bit of grown-upness to do that, a bit of insight. But once you realize that how you personally respond to these things, and so the pilots are trained to pick up these things very early on, and if they start to feel slightly vague or whatever, they know that it's actually premonitory signs of something that could be really serious if they don't fix it, so they slow down and they do whatever they do. But I think that probably happens in many other areas as well, and I guess it must be the same in music. Yeah,
I mean, you touched on the scuba diving, and interestingly, there's the narcosis of that can set in after, when you dive around 40 meters or under, and you start to feel very drunk, which is something I've never experienced, so I can't compare. But you have mechanisms to try and protect yourself from it going worse. You maybe just counting your fingers, and if you're going through one more than 3 times, you know, it's time to go up a bit. So yeah.
I think what you were saying, Miguel and Roger, described to me, I don't know if they're called microaggressions. That seems to be appropriate to me. Just the idea, and speaking as somebody who suffers from anxiety, that sometimes the things that are there are tiny. They're objectively tiny, and writing them down does very much help you see that they can be tiny. Then oddly, often the things that trigger me are not the bigger events, the big worries, because for some reason they just seem to come into line. It's the little things. It's the sort of things that you said about, you know, an email you haven't sent, or something you haven't resolved, something that's arrived but you're pushing it to the side of your mind because you don't want to deal with it at that moment, and they become huge. And if you don't catch them, I think the writing it down is something I do, and certainly that seems a really good way to make something physical and make it able to be dealt with, and also to sort of see it in its proper context. It's the flip side of doing a gratitude list, which I find very helpful. If you're feeling, you know, what's going on, and just identify what's going on in your life and what there is to be pleased about, and what the actual truth is, rather than what you think, which might be, I'm about to get fired, this orchestra won't want to play this is rubbish, I've done it all wrong. Those things, but and also that more general malaise of sitting down and trying to write something and finding it difficult. And I think if you can kind of clear the path for yourself, that really helps. Yeah. So
can I ask Miguel and Nick, can I ask you about, as composers, I have this sort of rather naive picture of composers sitting on their own, sort of in an attic and composing. And I don't know whether I'm seeing you in attics composing, but whether there is and Miguel, I know you said you're an only child, but whether as composers you are normally part of a community of other composers where you can sit down and say, actually, look, I'm having this issue. Are you in the way that you might do if you were in a surgical team, or perhaps in an orchestra or something, I don't know, or whether you are functioning as individuals who, and I ask that because a lot of the time you kind of have to have made a mistake yourself in order to open up conversations with other people who've made mistakes, for example, or whatever. And how does it work in music, in composition?
I mean, just quickly to chime in, I imagine, and I hope Nick is in a much better place than me for this, but I only have the odd chance to meet with all the composer friends, and it's usually done through either texts or phone call, which is not the same thing. So I don't have that much of the physical contact, which I miss from the old days. And I suppose I know London's a much bigger city, but also being, I suppose, one of the part of the last generation of digital immigrants, I miss the fact that a lot of things were done not through social media, definitely, and weren't done through texts or through the phone, but in contact. And when you were mid-sentence, someone wasn't going to quickly check a message that just pinged. So it was a lot more rewarding than it can be these days. So sorry.
No, I mean, I agree with you. And I think that the difference between being friends and being friends on social media, I think it's incredibly corrosive at times, the expectation social media brings. But I mean, I do feel really lucky. I write a lot with my brother Ben, I write a lot with my friend Ollie and other people as well. And also we've got a room up at Air, which I miss massively at the moment, because Air is the best community I've ever been part of, and I feel really lucky because there's...
So can you say a bit about Air?
Yes, of course. So Air, which is up in Hampstead, is fantastic multi-studio complex. They record all the best scores there and records and all sorts of things. It's been going for years. George Martin's founded it. And there's a top floor with rooms that used to be bedrooms when it was a residential studio, and there are about half a dozen of us composers who lurk around up there, and it is at the risk of sounding, you know, showing off, it is pop into the other room, oh, what do you think of that? Oh, that's great. And you've got, you know, David Arnold downstairs who's brilliant, and my brother's there, and Pete Gregson's there, Toby Pittman's there. It's a sort of community of people bugging each other, popping in, listening to stuff, chatting about...
Right, so now I hate you just a tiny little bit more. Nice.
Yeah, I wanted to achieve that, Miguel. But yeah, so that I really miss. And although, as you say, Miguel, we're all chatting and texting, and that's great. There's something about physically walking into somebody's room, somebody popping into your room, and just, you know, meanwhile downstairs there's an 80-piece orchestra or a 20-piece or something, you know, and there's a canteen. I miss it. I really miss it. I could go on.
There's it's interesting because I read a really interesting book last year, and it was talking about the different areas of the world that suffer the most with depression and anxiety, and the places that have a much stronger sense of community have vastly lower rates of depression and anxiety amongst the people that live there. And I think that sort of sense of community plays a huge part in mental well-being, and being able to share problems and feeling like you have a support network around you can help in ways that you don't even really realize when you're in it, you know. And yeah, and it sort of goes back to this sort of reoccurring theme that we've had throughout all of our conversations, which is teamwork and collaboration and reaching out when you've got a problem. I wanted to actually ask the composers, when you've had a real issue, like something is going really, really wrong. So I've wanted to sort of raise the point of being honest with the people that you're working with. If you've made a mistake or something's going wrong, I've often found that I've been absolutely terrified to tell anybody, because I'm worried that it's going to reflect badly on me, or I might not get like the next job, or I might get fired. But actually, in most cases, when I have been open and honest about it, the person who I'm speaking to is perfectly fine, and they want to find a solution, because at the end of the day, we're all human and everyone makes mistakes. So I wonder if there was a specific, anything specific that has happened to either of you where that's happened and actually sharing the problem has massively helped you.
Well, I don't mind. Well, again, obviously I'm not going to name names, but I think this ties in with the fact that it's important, I think, for your well-being, to not, and it starts off with me to not say yes to every gig that you get, and there are plenty of composers that, maybe their surname is Hoover, that gobble up everything that comes within their horizon. And I think it's important that especially if you know that someone is prone to creating a ton of trouble, maybe you could be better off avoiding that scenario. And because I've been in those circumstances where either I've been luckily warned off by an editor friend telling me, jump out of this as soon as you can because it's going down badly, and they've always been right. The people I work with, when things go wrong, I feel I have a lot more energy, or a lot more almost will in my bank to approach them in a very tactful way. Because if I was used to going from battle to battle, at some point I'll just snap and send that email that we all dreamed that one day we're going to send, and with all the expletives in alphabetical order. So I think it's important to, if you not constantly sort of exhausting yourself by saying yes to everything, you have a lot more time to take those things with the time and the dedication and the love that they need. So,
I mean, I agree. I think the temptation, we're all freelancers, the temptation, if we're lucky enough to be offered lots of work, which is wonderful, but the temptation is yes. But the lesson I suppose I've learned is that I'm more comfortable, and I suspect most people are more comfortable when you're at sort of 8 out of 10, if you see what I mean, so that there's an overspill. Because although I love the idea that editors say, nah, steer clear of this job, Miguel, but I think a lot of the time you don't quite know. A job can look like it's a very smooth thing. You think, well, that makes sense. They haven't got that much time. And then something flips and there's an extra 2 weeks in the edit, and the network don't like your theme, and you've suddenly got, and you can, or I can't, accurately 100% predict how a job's going to go. And
no, I agree. No, yeah, I agree.
You've got that leeway at the top.
Sorry?
If you have that little leeway at the top, just that breathing space to allow.
I agree. So it ties in with not going for everything, but right. Also, I think it depends a lot on the way they treat you. I've been on a feature documentary that at the last, I had written the complete score, and the last minute new a treasure trove of footage emerged, and they meant throwing out everything and writing everything new. And because I'd been treated properly, with respect, it's more that I saw everyone was pushing in the same direction. When the time came, I bought every single grain of coffee that was available in South London, and I made sure they got what they needed. And that all stems from, again, not saying yes to everything, trying to avoid the people that you know are going to be troublemakers and are going to bring you down. And hopefully that will mean having enough energy and ammunition in your arsenal when the moment arrives.
And if you can do that, there's a certain amount of pleasure to be. You make friendships when you're sort of in the trenches together. When things are tough, you make friendships and creative friendships.
Yeah.
You're with the director, and it's, as you say, Miguel, we've got the whole thing's got to be done again. But you respect one another, you trust one another. It's actually great. It's actually exciting because you're.
Yeah. No, I agree, and I have two composer friends who have been on the verge of carrying on with a relationship with a director that went on to be Oscar nominated or Oscar winner, and they had to cut the friendship just before, and they were pretty distraught. But in the long run, they know it was the right thing to do. It was an abusive relationship, so I've never been anywhere near that scenario, but I can totally empathize and see, for whatever my 2 cents can be offered in those circumstances when we talk about it. I think they've done the right decision, even though it's painful for them to see someone else going on to score a Oscar-winning picture.
Emily, I've had a sense that you might have wanted us to tell you about when we were late with deadlines and what happened. And did we get fired? And I mean, I guess my answer to that is that I used to think that you cannot let people see that you cannot ever be late. You must never be late. And I still think that's a good principle. But actually, I don't know if I'm just getting old and going easy on myself, but I think if you're, if you're under pressure, if the edits come in late and you're doing your best, but you're a couple of cues behind or something, and you talk to them, you say, look, you know how things are going, we're nearly there, need a couple of hours, need a half day extra, I've never been made to feel awful for that. They appreciate the fact you're talking to them. You're not saying, sorry, I haven't written anything and it's going to be a month. It's just there's a little bit of elasticity in a schedule, I think. And just as I think it's really important to be diligent, I also think that there's...
Yeah, communication is key. I think they understand it. You explain A plus B, then
Yeah.
I think everybody would appreciate, you know, your best work rather than something that was rushed to be finished. I think. You brought up an interesting point there. I don't know if you know, you're saying that you know, the best relationships are, or not the best relationships, but good relationships are built on stressful situations, and it's exciting to sort of work on the edge, and abusive relationships that have been ended just before the point of Academy Awards. I've discussed this with the other Composer Wellbeing team, and a concept that we've sort of been talking about is, do you think a creative greatness comes from high pressure situations? Do you think you always have to be working on the edge in order to get your best work? And that goes for all three of you, Roger included.
Sorry, Roger. I mean, I would say you don't have to be. It's not a prerequisite. As much as I believe that you can do great work under those circumstances, I also think that there's a tendency among some people to create that circumstance because they think that's what has to happen. Because you see a lot of, you know, oh, I'm in the studio 18, 20 hours a day. I'm doing that. I'll never stop. And you think, there's a kind of odd machismo about that kind of thing, which I think is in my opinion, wholly wrong and damaging, and just creates, it creates a false impression, because I don't believe it has to be like that. B, if it has to be like that, I'm in the wrong business, because that sounds horrible. And C, I think there's as much as it can be great to have a high pressure environment, I think also it shouldn't be a prerequisite. It shouldn't be a kind of, well, if we're not feeling really stressed, and if we don't look really tired, then we're not doing it right, because that's not true, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree.
It's a balancing act, isn't it, to get the right sort of point between having enough, being sort of alert enough and in the right state of sort of mental arousal to be doing your best work, but not getting those things you've just been talking about, you know, working 20 hours a day and being under unpleasant pressure. But somehow finding the right point is quite a difficult one. I think it, certainly from my experience, it's quite important not to. I think, Miguel, I think you both. I agree with you when you say that there is a temptation to kind of almost make a point of showing people that you're tired and working under pressure and doing great things under difficult circumstances. And I think you have to resist that, because it can be quite seductive, but it's probably counterproductive in a way. And from my experience, the people who have been most effective in working in sometimes very difficult situations, you know, big, bad, nasty trauma operations and things, are the ones who give the appearance of being unruffled and not sort of showing, not exactly glorying, but not emphasizing the fact that they're doing difficult things in difficult circumstances, but just calmly doing the best they can and quietly and effectively. And I think that's even more impressive. But it's something that I think most of the people I've seen who've done that have been later on in their careers. So I think it's probably something you gradually develop with the years. It's difficult to do when you're 22, I think.
I think also it's not just experience, but I think it's that sense of how you're perceived by your peers. I think when you're young and new to any industry, I think you do feel the pressure to make it look like you are working really, really hard, working all hours of the day, because you live in a society where that is seen as a success, working really hard. And then I think, you're completely right, Roger, as you get further in your career in whatever industry, you feel less pressure to look busy all the time, because you've already sort of gained a certain amount of respect from the people that you work with, and they know that you're good at your job, so you don't have to sort of pretend to be working 20 hours a day anymore. Yeah,
no, I think it's very interesting. I've been writing a book about what it is to become expert recently, and one of the things that I've noticed from talking to a lot of experts is that I think there comes this point in your sort of pathway from being a complete novice to being a master, if you like, when you have to make a transition from thinking that your work is all about you to realizing it's all about whoever it is that your work is for. And that's a crucial transition that doesn't always happen, and it certainly doesn't happen at the same time. But I think it's really important. So to begin with, you're thinking, well, I've passed all these exams and I want to show off, or I've got all these skills and I want to. And then you have to realize that actually the whole point is for the people who are going to be listening to your work, or are going to be your patients or your audience or whatever. And you need to make that shift in your point of attention. I learned this from working with magicians who are acutely aware of that it's very easy to focus on showing off things that you've learned to do with cards and coins, but actually it only makes sense as an experience for the audience if you think about them more than you do about yourself. But I think it's much more widely applicable, actually, and I think it's something that people aren't always aware of it happening, sometimes because it hasn't happened, and sometimes because it has, but they haven't registered it. But to me, that's a crucial point on the sort of path to becoming expert, as I guess we are. But sorry, just before I finish, but alongside that is the need to inhabit and take responsibility for and be proud of your own individuality and your voice. So you're not extinguishing yourself or erasing yourself, far from it. You're developing your individuality and your style and your uniqueness, but at the same time you're doing it. It's not about you, it's about somebody else. So that can often be a sort of tension that you have to resolve, I think. The
difference between teamwork in a close sense and teamwork in a wider sense, I suppose, being that if you're a music team, you're part of one thing, you're all aiming for the same goal, and there will usually be a composer and assistants, orchestrators, players, and there's all kinds of people. But then there's the wider team, which is the production company working with the director, the editor, and all these people. And the more those things are integrated and the more those people talk to each other and the more those people engage, the better. I did a show with Ben, Thunderbirds, which we did for 5 years, and their production team were brilliant at having come over and watch an episode and come over and have a coffee, come over, and then they get everybody together. And so we all knew each other and people were chatting on, and in touch with each other outside of the show itself. And so you had this community that developed, and it made, for me anyway, everything we did felt far more valuable because we knew who everybody else was, and they were, if not friends, they were kind of pals, and we were all shooting towards the same goal, and all loved it and all tried really hard on it. And I think that's that sense of community and of fellowship.
And you feel that you're valuable. I suppose that's one thing that can make a massive difference between work, that especially if it's contrasting because it's happening at the same time. I've been very fortunate with series like First Dates, even though it has a tremendous turnaround of producers. I have always been treated as if I was as important as the people who created it, and for me that because obviously actions mean more than words. When they decided to take me to the BAFTA Award ceremony, when they got nominated, they said, no, if we win, you go on stage with us. And I didn't want to, but I said, no, you're as important as A, B, or C that they did this for the show. And that meant the world to me. That sort of was enough for me to from that point treat them as if I don't know, they were all my cousins, or it was no longer work. It was a fun project.
Yeah, it's such it's not only a lovely move, it's a smart thing to do. It's a smart thing to make people be part of your family, you say your cousins, your extended family, and you're a big part of that show, Miguel. So, it's a huge character in there. But perhaps that is easier for you, and it's become more of a thing because you've got that sense that you are part of a gang, and you're not just composing. Because we can be, we're all, before lockdown, we were all still quite isolated at times. We sit in our rooms and we do what we do, and then we send it off. We don't take it up to Soho. We send it off by email, and that's it. And you often have done whole projects where you don't meet somebody face to face.
Yeah.
The occasional video chat, and it works well, and they're happy, and they come back. But you don't you don't have a kinship. You don't have that sense that you're part of a gang.
I
And
agree.
it's so helpful, especially when you're feeling the pressure, to have a sense of investment in the people and to feel like I'm not just doing this because I have to do this. I'm doing this.
Yeah, no, it's quite intangible. Or you can't put a finger on exactly what it is inside you that changes or what grows, but something, a few lights suddenly come on in your brain and that are important for the work you're going to do. And you don't know how to switch them on otherwise, but you're grateful that they are now working for you.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, and I think sort of on one point I wanted to make on this, on the safe space thing, because when you invited me kindly to this talk, I was struggling to find what could I actually see as a safe space. And then it kind of, I think throughout this conversation, it sort of hit me that maybe it could be that I'm being a bit too literal, but it's almost the closest thing I have to a safe space. That when things get a bit, I feel that I'm running on fumes, I try to focus on simple things that I enjoy, not sort of. For instance, one thing that gets my dopamine flowing is scents, smells, particularly lime tree, jasmine. And when I'm feeling that nothing else can be done and I can't even be bothered to exercise, and we all know that that helps, I'll go on a walk through any path around here that will take me through a row of lime trees or jasmine bushes. And well, in fact, there's a street I've recently discovered in Deptford. Just kind of, I even make the point of cycling through there, where you get in quick succession a sort of first a burst of weed, and then lime tree, and then sort of oregano chicken on a barbecue, oregano marinated chicken, and it's pure joy. You feel like you've gone to a 5D film whenever they exist, and it helps me recharge my batteries. So it's, as much as I see it, that's my safe space, easily achieved, not a week in the Maldives. It's something that costs nothing.
Scent is such a great thing. And you said jasmine, I've got a bush outside, and it's the last 2 months have just been amazing. I do go and stand by it.
Yeah.
Just breathe it in for a bit. It's a strange thing, but it takes you away really powerfully, like a bit like music. I think it's this strange intangible sense. It's, you know,
but can you relax listening to, I mean, let's say you're a bit exhausted with the way work has been taking you. Can you really relax with music? I feel that we've been obviously blessed and cursed. I can't use music to relax in that circumstance, because you'll remind me of, I should be maybe, or I'll never be as good as this guy or whatever. So
I have a few songs and pieces that I know from childhood, which act like a comfort blanket for me, if I really need them. But that only works every so often, you know, and it's not stuff that's like what I'd be doing. So, because I think you're absolutely right. If you go and listen to something that's akin to something you would want to be doing or that you are doing,
yeah,
it's only going to make things worse, I suspect. But silence, stepping away, walking is brilliant for me. Walking is just the right temperature of exercise, so that you're not.
I know, because it isn't to me. We all know that exercise will at least create a low level of endorphins that will sort of, I'll bring it up a bit, but sometimes you know that exercise is completely off the menu. You can't. And for me, the only way that will then I know it's sort of cognitive dissonance. I'll get on a bike to go and through this row of trees, but it's purely to get those bursts of.
And do you find that? And I used to think it was a bit naff when people sang into their phones, but I've become that person now, because out on a walk, if you I'm getting nowhere here, out on a walk for 10 minutes, and 6 times out of 10. Something pops in, and it's strange. And it would be a fascinating conversation to have another time, maybe, just how our brains do the processing for us.
I think there's something about changing the environment. I find that a lot of the ideas that turn out to be most productive I've had in the shower, and I think that's because of going into a different space with different different physical stimuli, obviously hot water and all the rest of it, but also being away from writing things down, and it just sort of reframes things a bit. And I wonder whether, being with lime trees or jasmine bushes or going for a walk all these things are doing something about changing the environment a bit, aren't they? that maybe just gives access to even a physical kind of space, a bit like the mental safe spaces we've been talking about, but maybe it's another instance of the same thing.
But I can't tie in with the whistling onto the phone, because for me it's absolutely crucial that I leave my mobile phone behind when I go on these things. And it harks back to me mentioning that I feel lucky that I'm one of the last digital immigrants who grew up knowing what it is not for someone not to be able to reach you, for you not to be able to go on the internet, for you not to be able to read any social media. So I leave the phone behind, and yeah, if I all of a sudden have an idea, well, tough luck, maybe it'll come again. But
I'm sure that's healthier than taking your phone. And you're quite right, taking your phone with you is a terrible temptation to sort of sit walking along doing this.
Exactly, because as soon as you sit, you'll go, if you check either the time or whatever, it's, oh, let me, no.
Yeah, but I do think, I wonder if there's, what you were saying, Roger, about stepping away, a different circle. I wonder if there's a sort of slight performance anxiety sitting in front of your computer, which you know, or even in front of the piano, which I really enjoy doing, but there's still an expectation. You're sitting there going, right, business time.
Yeah.
Roger, you've actually done quite a lot of study into situational performance, haven't you, with your live sort of surgery performances. That sort of ties in quite nicely, doesn't it?
I think it does, yes. We've done a lot of stuff with creating simulations of surgical operations. I mean, not real operations, but simulations of them. So, you know, using realistic silicon models for the surgical side, but then looking at how people relate to one another in teams and what happens when things become difficult. And that's interesting, because that provides you with a way of representing a particular world, let's say the operating theatre, and then being able to make adjustments to different aspects of it, but doing it in view of other people who may or may not be members of those groups. They may be surgeons, or they may be members of the general public, or children, or whatever. And so you can get different perspectives and different views and different ideas by bringing an area of practice that normally happens behind closed doors, physically in the sense of surgery. Although in the case of composition, presumably it happens behind the closed doors of your head, because nobody knows what you're thinking about when you're composing, I imagine. And so there's something about making visible and tangible stuff that is normally not available to other people. So that in our case, we've had a lot of inspiration, a lot of ideas by inviting the responses of musicians and magicians and puppeteers and actors and all kinds of people to this world of surgery, and they see things in it that we as sort of people who are familiar no longer see. And I think that process has been a very interesting one, because it's brought out all sorts of different ways of thinking about things that no longer occur to you if you're already in one way of thinking. And sometimes you need people from completely outside to break through that.
I think that's something that you would get on when you do take yourself out of your usual surroundings, like for instance your studio, and you go on a walk. That is almost the same thing. You're sort of getting that external stimuli, like you say, Nick, like you'll be walking down the road and all of a sudden an idea will come to you, and I think it's sometimes you do have to sort of take yourself out of what you're so used to being surrounded with and let things sort of happen to you in order to get that inspiration.
And it's knowing when the right moment is to do that, because there's one thing just going, sod this, I'm off, or you say, no, this isn't happening right now, so we're going to take a break, and that's fine. And not feeling guilty and not feeling, I'm not achieving anything, shit, you know, you taking a moment saying, it's okay, I'm going to go somewhere else, as Miguel says, the smell of lime, smell of weed, whatever the smell is, and just being somewhere else. And I think often, not always, but often that's enough for your brain just to sort of get up the gear. If you're not getting into the gears, I imagine bike wheels whizzing around when they're not in gear and nothing's sticking. You can get out, if you can move yourself away from where you are, that's often enough to just sort of click back in, I think.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that's, you know, you've summed up perfectly. There's, you know, that sort of that physical safe space and also that mental safe space. I think both of them actually, we've sort of come to the conclusion, is actually just taking a step back, whether that's mentally or physically, removing yourself physically from a situation or removing yourself mentally from a situation, and just taking a breather. And that can often sort of just give you perspective on what the issues are.
And also, as Nick was saying, if it's not happening, if you tried the best you can, I see it, at least in my work, I have learned to sort of to go a bit easier on me. Before I would have said that whatever reward I would have in coming for having done something, for having achieved something, I would have set a really high bar. And let's say I needed to write, I don't know, a dubstep track, and I tried best I could. At the end of the afternoon, it was still ridiculous. I would have maybe agonized a bit over it, and now I'd simply go, you've tried your best, you deserve a chocolate eclair. I think positive reinforcement when things don't go well helps a lot. So I would go and buy it and maybe chase it up with a couple of cheesecakes. It's that extra push that you need from yourself, that no one else is going to do it for you. If you have, I don't know how it is to have an assistant, but maybe if your assistant told you, it's quite, you know, that they may be biased for saying that. So it needs to come from within. So I make a point of giving myself a reward for trying really hard, even if the results are pitiful. So
that brings you, I mean, that's the type of thing that my mum always used to say to me at school, that, you know, if you try your absolute hardest and it still doesn't work out, at least you can walk away knowing that you put everything in and you have no regrets. And I think that is, you know,
the next day you may see the result of that. And whereas if you're really harsh, maybe not.
Yeah.
Next day test is a really good thing. I think if you've time to do that, as well as Miguel says, something that seems appalling one evening can seem like it's really nearly there the next day. And again, I guess that's achieved by stepping aside. Can I just say that I'd like to hear more about these chocolate eclairs of which Miguel speaks?
Yeah, it's not something I'm very proud of, but yeah, it might have happened quite a few in the past, but you do whatever you need.
Cool. Well, I think we're going to wrap up there. I think we've covered everything that we wanted to talk to you guys about today. You know, the physical safe space, mental safe space, positive reinforcement, taking a step back from things, collaboration. You know, all of these themes, they do keep coming up in every conversation, and it's just so valuable to hear your personal experiences, and I'm sure everyone is finding them really helpful in their own personal work as well. So thank you everybody for joining us today. It was really great talking to you.